At the Hot Springs Hotel, I sent a bikini pic to Calvin by mistake. His response was swift and cryptic. Are we? I couldn't help but laugh. What's the point of a bikini if there's nothing to show for it? He teased. Completely unaware of the storm I had just stirred, I headed off to enjoy the hot springs. Hours later, I returned to my phone blowing up with missed calls and a barrage of messages. My scalp tingled with dread. Night at a hotel? He texted. Are you out of your mind? I know which hotel you're at. I'm coming in 90 minutes. Wait for me. Before I could respond, there was a knock at my door. It was Calvin. I hadn't even opened his messages yet. My phone lay forgotten as I opened the door. Facepalm, I muttered under my breath as he scanned me carefully, baseball bat in hand. That photo, I began. It was a mistake. He didn't hear me. He was already rummaging through the room, even digging through the trash. What are you looking for? I asked, exasperated. He glared at me. That jerk, he muttered, his words dripping with anger. Tell me you didn't come to the hot springs alone in something so revealing. Who goes to the hot springs alone? I rolled my eyes. Seriously, who? His eyes narrowed. Last week, you were solo, and now you're at a hotel after knowing this guy for a week? Something's fishy. 0 results, he muttered, clutching his bat. Where is he? I pointed to the room next door, and before I could finish, he darted for the door. He's next door. I yawned lazily. My parents are with me. He hesitated, then dropped the bat into the trash and collapsed onto the couch. Why didn't you say it was a family trip earlier? Calvin grumbled. Should I at least say hello to your folks? Could be rude not to. I shot him an eye roll. You did bring a baseball bat, though. My parents are asleep, I added. Calvin's mom and mine have a rivalry that's been going on since diapers, and clearly, it wasn't going anywhere. I had just made a simple mistake with that photo, and yet here he was, driving over 200 kilometers to confront me. You know what? I sighed. No boyfriend here. I'm still single. Happy now. Can you leave already? I demanded. He smirked. Maybe you're just bitter because you're single and can't stand me having fun. For years, Calvin had torn apart every love letter I'd ever received, sabotaged any relationship I might have had. He was the walking, breathing reason my love life was a joke. But now, with no one to hide behind, he finally relaxed. See? No boyfriend. You happy? I challenged him. Sure, he quipped. But with that attitude, who's gonna like you? I punched him lightly in the arm. No empty rooms left. If I drive back another 2.5 hours, I might die of exhaustion. Honestly, dying outside sounds pretty good right now, I said flatly. Calvin shook his head, muttering, Women, so cruel. You're leaving now? I asked, a little too tired to care. He grabbed his bat out of the trash and grumbled, If I die, I'll haunt you as a ghost. But then, seeing him drag himself toward the door, I couldn't help but soften. Fine. You can sleep on the couch. As it turns out, showing mercy to an enemy is a bad idea. I could hear him shifting restlessly on the couch, his voice breaking the silence every few minutes. Are you asleep? He asked. Really? Are you faking it? I finally snapped. Do you have a problem? Calvin chuckled. You used to grind your teeth when we shared a bed as kids. Sounded like a horror movie. Can we drop the when I was 3 stuff already? I groaned. Let me sleep. I can't, he said. This couch is too short. My legs are cramping. I rolled over, trying to ignore him, but then he spoke again. Forgot to ask, he said, his voice near my ear. Who was the bikini pic really meant for? With that much fabric, what was it even hiding? I could feel myself rolling my eyes behind closed lids. None of your business. He wasn't satisfied. I watched you grow up. Of course, it's my business. Then, out of nowhere, he was standing right next to my bed, a blanket draped over his shoulders and shirtless. Are you crazy? I demanded. What are you doing creeping up on me while I'm sleeping? With a serious expression, he pushed forward. Who was it really meant for? Tina, okay? I blurted out. Tina's my BFF. You know her. Calvin plopped down on the floor, looking satisfied. Tina, huh? Should have said so earlier. My sleep was wrecked. There he was, sprawled out like he owned the place. Do I really not look good in that bikini? He suddenly asked. Not your best, I answered dryly. Fine, he huffed. No way that senior will find it appealing. What's senior? I raised an eyebrow. He jumped up from the floor, visibly jittery. Why would you wear that? Explain yourself. I knew his nerves were already on edge, and I enjoyed it. His reaction was everything I wanted. I turned my back to him and muttered, going to the beach with the senior. Good night, dark soul. I could feel the tension building as he let out a frustrated breath. Wait, the council geek with the glasses? The wireframe look. He was nearly shouting. I remember him. No way. You're going to the beach now. Then I heard footsteps pacing back and forth. That same flimsy excuse again? You're asking for trouble. Say something. With a smirk, I answered calmly. I'm sleeping. Turn around. Calvin flung the blanket off me, flipping me over. You're not sleeping. He was too close now, his hands on either side of my head. It had been hours since our last fight, but here we were, face to face. And he was shirtless. In that moment, everything froze. After a long, awkward silence, I broke the stillness. Why is your face so red? It wasn't just his face. Even his ears were flushed like a beet. Calvin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. You got me worked up. His usual laid-back demeanor was now replaced by something more intense. As I looked closer, I couldn't help but notice how much effort he'd put into his physique. Broad shoulders, a narrow waist. He was towering over me, making the ceiling seem impossibly far. I was the kind of person who'd only ever admired idols from afar, but now, standing this close to one, I couldn't help myself. Without thinking, I reached out and poked at his abs, just once. He grabbed my wrist instantly, his grip tight. His breath grew shallow, his gaze darkened. Joanna, what are you doing? He demanded, his voice low. My hand, still resting on his hot skin, felt like it might burn me. I've never touched real abs before, I muttered, almost absent-mindedly rubbing them again. They were firm, yet soft. I had never felt anything like it. Calvin let out a strained groan, veins popping in his neck, his frown deepening. After what felt like an eternity, he released my wrist and grabbed a blanket, storming out of the room. Hey! I called after him. Where are you going? Without a glance back, he mumbled, sleeping on the couch outside. Weren't you just complaining about not being able to stretch your legs? Just don't worry about it, he snapped, like I was the one nagging. Annoyed, I shouted back. Seriously, who was the one who woke me up and pinned me to the bed? For once, he didn't retort. There was a long pause, then Calvin's voice came through the door, slightly hoarse. I'm not bothering you anymore. Going to take a cold shower. Good night. That night, neither of us slept well. I had dreams about idols with chiseled chests, abs, and biceps, and I couldn't stop mentally touching them. Calvin, on the other hand, seemed to spend the entire night in and out of cold showers, battling insomnia. Who even does that? The next morning, we both had serious under-eye bags. Then, my mom practically shoved me into Calvin's car. Young people have so much energy these days, she said, winking. Driving over 200 miles at night just to meet up? Go with Calvin. Keep him company so he won't fall asleep on the road. For a moment, it felt like Calvin was her real son, not me. But honestly, with Calvin in the car, I didn't have to worry about sleep. I just had to hope we didn't start another fight. Calvin was driving with a grim expression, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Don't mess with me, he warned. I'm in a worse mood than a ghost right now. So I stayed silent. After a long while, he asked, his voice awkward, Are you really going to the beach with that glasses guy? Jealousy dripped from his words. I clicked my tongue. It's a student council retreat, okay? Last semester, thanks to him, I didn't fail my advanced math class. Did he tutor you? Calvin interrupted. Yeah, but I was planning to treat him to dinner, but he paid. I continued. You wanted to treat him? He asked, incredulous. Didn't get the chance. I was going to give him a gift. Calvin snorted. Homemade cookies? Is that your idea of a gift? I shot him a glance. Is there a problem? I looked around, hearing what seemed like a crunching noise. He chuckled darkly. Go ahead, bake them. Your cooking could poison him. I was about to strangle him when he swerved the car slightly. You want to die together with me? He teased. I couldn't even respond. My mind was already reciting Buddhist scriptures to calm me down. Forget it, I muttered. Don't argue with a fool. Meeting you must be my punishment in this lifetime. The day of the retreat arrived, and I brought my homemade bear-shaped cookies. Tina had said it was important to show gratitude. What if I needed his help again? With the tin of slightly burnt cookies in hand, I made my way to the restaurant. The senior wouldn't mind, right? Hopefully not. He was kind, unlike some mud I knew. Just then, a gust of wind blew, and a tall figure blocked my path. I blinked, and before I knew it, the cookie tin was snatched away. Calvin wasn't even out of breath as he ripped open the tin and started stuffing cookies in his mouth. You're out of your mind, I shouted, trying to grab it back. He ran off with the cookies, and I chased him, hitting him as I went. After a few dozen hits, he returned the ruined, crumbled bag to me, still chewing. Wow, almost starved to death there, he said, wiping crumbs from his mouth. I stared at the mangled cookies I could no longer give away. Are you part dog? I demanded. Do you even know what you're eating? Calvin swallowed the last of the cookies and grinned. Mind your own business. I already ate them. They were fine. Next time, make a bigger batch for me. I kicked him again. In your dreams. What are you even doing here? I asked, turning to leave. He raised an eyebrow. Came to eat the cookies. I threw the bag at him. Eat away, and may you choke on them. I had spent so much time perfecting those cookies, and now they were gone, devoured by Calvin. He followed me with a mischievous grin. Where are you headed? Going to dinner? Let me join you. Perfect chance to meet your classmates. He was like an annoying bandage that wouldn't come off. I remembered back in high school, when some boy had stopped me after school to confess. He was nervous, stammering through his words. Just as I was about to politely decline, Calvin had appeared out of nowhere, flinging his arm over my shoulder. Her brother doesn't allow her to date, he had said coldly before turning the guy away. Don't bother. After that, Calvin would always be there after school, acting like my personal bodyguard, scaring away any guy who showed interest in me. He took the role of a big brother seriously until I got to college, when, for a brief moment, I thought I'd finally gotten a reprieve. But, of course, that familiar feeling came back. Tonight, Simon had invited me to dinner alone, and I thought it was the perfect time to give him the not-so-perfect batch of cookies I'd made. But now those cookies were gone, and here I was, stuck with an unexpected tag-along. Sorry, Simon. I just bumped into Calvin, the son of my mom's good friend, I said, trying to explain. Calvin, ever the troublemaker, pushed me aside and casually plopped down next to Simon. We're not related by blood, he began, but we grew up like siblings. He emphasized the good siblings part, his grin practically oozing mischief. I facepalmed, while Simon smiled politely, though it seemed a little strained. So, you're Joanna's brother? Simon asked, extending a hand. Calvin grabbed it firmly, a little too firmly. Joanna's been under the wing of her senior, Calvin said. As her brother, I'm here to say thanks.
Dinner's on me.
Simon, maintaining his cool, smiled. I appreciate the gesture, but this dinner was something I arranged with Joanna. It wouldn't make sense for you to pay. The tension in the air was thick, and the handshake between the two men felt like it could snap at any moment. I watched, uncomfortable, as their grip tightened, knuckles turning white. I quickly jumped in to ease the situation. How about we just split the bill? Simon, let's go with what Joanna wants. Yeah, Calvin agreed with a nod. Joanna's call. A brief truce was struck, and I felt a tiny bit of relief. Dinner wasn't much better. Calvin and Simon seemed to clash at every turn, their energy opposing in ways I couldn't even begin to describe. They say Joanna can be a handful, Calvin said, his tone ominous. She's a bit clumsy if I don't keep an eye on her. Hearing him say my name like that made me shiver. Normally, we call each other by ridiculous nicknames. Simon smiled, but it was calm and unwavering. Oh no, Joanna's got it together. You're too kind. His gaze softened when it met mine, warm and kind. And besides, he continued, taking care of the girl you like is just natural. My skin prickled. I froze mid-bite, suddenly feeling like the room had shifted. Simon continued, his voice smooth and confident. I might be abrupt, but I've been planning to confess tonight anyway. My heart skipped a beat. With you being Joanna's brother, it's nice to have you witness this. Calvin's face hardened, his teeth grinding. I'm not her biological brother, he gritted out. Still a brother, right? Simon said, with an edge of humor in his voice. Calvin's face kept changing colors. From where I sat, I could see his jaw tightening, his muscles straining. I was genuinely worried Calvin might lose it right here in front of Simon. After all, he'd been single forever. Watching someone confess to me like this had to feel like a cruel joke to him. Thankfully, after a few deep breaths, Calvin calmed himself. All right, he said, his voice hard but slightly amused. If you want to pursue Joanna, you'll have to drink me under the table first. I usually don't drink, Simon replied. Calvin casually raised his chin, a challenge in his eyes. Scared? Simon smiled. If Big Brother wants a drink, I'm in. And then I heard it, something loud and crunching. Calvin, not missing a beat, asked, hard stuff or beer? Simon shrugged. It's up to you, Big Brother. Calvin slammed his hand down on the table. Bring them all. A variety of liquors, beers, and spirits soon filled the table, creating total chaos. I sat back and sipped my milk, watching them. I had never seen Calvin drink before, and with his earlier arrogance, I thought he'd handle his liquor just fine. But not even halfway through, Calvin was already down for the count. I exchanged an awkward glance with Simon, who was still perfectly sober. Simon, could you book another room? I asked. He's in no shape to go home. Simon waved his hand. No need to be formal, it's nothing. Calvin lay sprawled on the table, completely hammered, yet his face still had that same foul expression. Sorry for today, I muttered. He's a bit high-strung. If he said anything offensive, don't take it personally. Simon, barely tipsy with a soft blush on his cheeks, asked quietly, Is he really your brother? I paused. Kind of. Do you see him as a brother? Simon pressed gently. What are you getting at? I asked, confused. Simon shook his head lightly, his voice soft. It's the drink talking. What I said earlier, I meant it. I just want a fair shot. His gaze was so warm, like moonlight, as he waited for my response. Being around him always gave me a sense of peace, but somehow, something was missing. I opened my mouth to speak, but then Calvin suddenly shot up, yelling, More drinks. Refills. No slacking off. He leaned back into me, and I quickly shoved him back down onto the table. Thanks for liking me, but I started, but Calvin interrupted again. I don't want to be a big brother or any cheap relative, Calvin barked. I'm out. Simon glanced at Calvin, then back at me, his smile never faltering. No worries. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Even as just friends, I'm happy. And then, to make things even more inconvenient, Calvin vomited. If he hadn't actually retched twice, I would have sworn it was all an act. Luckily, Simon didn't mind and helped me drag Calvin back to the hotel. After seeing Simon off, I threw a towel onto Calvin's face. If you can't handle your liquor, don't drink, I scolded. You've embarrassed us at my school. Calvin, slumped on the bed, groaned slightly, clearly uncomfortable. I sighed and started scrubbing his face with the towel. Do you have issues? Can't you know your own limits? Drinking's bad for you, you know? With your tolerance, how could you challenge someone to drink you under the table? I muttered, wiping his flushed face. He didn't respond, but his eyes were beginning to redden. For the first time, he seemed genuinely fragile. For a long time, we sat in silence. Finally, his grip on my wrist tightened, and I looked up in surprise. I'm sorry, Calvin murmured softly. I'm sorry for embarrassing you. His words were so quiet, I almost thought I misheard them. Then he repeated, "Sorry for embarrassing you." I was at a loss for words. He looked at me, his expression unusually soft, and I felt an unfamiliar discomfort in my chest. I was about to say something when I saw his eyes glistening, like he was on the verge of tears. I quickly turned away, my face burning with embarrassment. "Hey, it's not like you drank more than anyone," I mumbled, trying to ease the moment.
No need to cry.
"Yeah, it's a bit awkward, but just a little. Next time, don't overestimate yourself like that." Calvin ignored my words of comfort. He simply looked at me, his gaze stormy and dark, as though I were the cause of his inner turmoil. "Your senior likes you."
Yeah.
"He's been nice to you."
Yeah.
"He seems like a good guy."
Yeah.
Calvin's Adam's apple bobbed, and his eyes grew darker still. "I like you too."
Yeah.
My first thought? He was definitely messing with me again. I searched his face for any sign that he was joking, but all I saw was the redness creeping up his eyes. I was clearly the first to say anything, but still, I wasn't sure if this was a joke or something else entirely. "Is it too late now?" he asked, voice tight. "You like that senior, and he likes you." I couldn't find the words to reply, my throat tight with uncertainty. Suddenly, Calvin grabbed my shoulders, his fingers trembling. "Can you not like him?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. A sharp, metallic ring filled my ears, the beat of my heart thundering in my chest. Calvin's intense gaze made my skin flush, and my whole body went still. I paused for a moment before blurting out, "You look like you're about to cry." With that, Calvin locked himself in the bathroom. So really hiding his pride, huh? I was left standing there, unsure whether to stay or leave. Should I try to say something comforting? Like, "It's okay for men to cry," or "You've done great already"? After a long moment of deliberation, I called Tina. She had always said that Calvin's behavior, those constant signs of antagonism, was his way of showing he liked me. She had jokingly predicted I'd have plenty of romantic interests soon, and that Calvin would confess to me. At the time, I thought she was just being silly.
But now?
I wasn't so sure. Maybe Tina really did have a knack for reading people. After explaining everything, Tina's laughter exploded through the phone, shaking with excitement. "So, Calvin found out about your team-building event location from that trader, huh?" I knew it. I couldn't help but laugh nervously. He panicked when he saw the senior, didn't he? Oh my, and crying? Tears from a guy? That's the ultimate thrill for a girl. I couldn't stop the grin from spreading across my face. I can't picture a 6'3" guy crying. It's like watching a giant fall apart. Tina was practically giddy, but I quickly interrupted. All right. What do I do now?" I looked nervously at the bathroom door. "He's locked in there. Is he secretly crying in there?" Tina cleared her throat, trying to sound serious. "Knock on the door." "Knock," I repeated, feeling the heat rise to my face. What do I even say? I felt so embarrassed, I could practically dig myself a hole big enough for the entire Disney cast. "Just ask if he wants to come out and cry in your arms," Tina said, her voice breaking into another explosive laugh. Honestly, best friends are the least reliable when you need them. As I was about to curse Tina out, the bathroom door clicked open. I quickly hung up, flustered. Calvin came out slowly, his face and hair damp, the collar of his t-shirt stained with water, drops falling from his bangs. I hesitated, then asked cautiously, "Are you okay?" "I'm not okay." He stepped forward, trapping me against the wall. I tried to sidestep, but he blocked me with his arm. A perfect caved on. I was cornered. "It doesn't matter if you and the senior like each other," he said, his voice low and serious. "I've decided to be honest with you."
He paused.
"Let me finish. You're too close." "It's hot," I stammered, feeling the heat radiating off of him. Calvin was so much taller than me, and as he leaned down, it felt suffocating. I wanted to run, but there was no way out. His proximity was overwhelming. The heat coming off him made me feel like I was about to catch fire. "Let's stay like this. Distance just tempts you to run," he said, his voice lowering as he gazed at me. "Joanna, I like you." It's not just a whim or something temporary. Since the first time I pulled your pigtails, I've liked you. I mumbled softly. Who likes someone and pulls their pigtails? It's not the joking kind of liking, he said, his voice more serious. It's really, really liking you. To the point where every night, it's you in my dreams. I couldn't help but squint, mumbling, is your mind full of dirty thoughts? Calvin leaned in closer, a mischievous glint in his eye. If you keep interrupting, I'll kiss you. I covered my mouth in shock. You dare? Why wouldn't I? He smirked. Worst case, you kiss me, and then you kill me. Besides, aren't you going to date that senior? He's not green tea, I retorted. And who said I'm going to date him? His eyes brightened suddenly. You're not going to date him, right? I felt his mood shift from gloomy to something else, his face lighting up like a switch had been flipped. I pouted, not ready to give him the satisfaction. Not dating him doesn't mean I'll date you. Calvin grinned, his usual playful smirk returning. He leaned into my ear and whispered, Want to give it a try with me? Try what? I asked, wary. You're always drooling over those muscular guys on social media, he teased. You know how long I've been working out. I remembered when Calvin shot up in height, and I teased him about looking like a beanpole. But when did he bulk up so much? The image of him shirtless came to my mind, and I had to swallow hard. How do you know I like guys like that? I asked, caught off guard. Is that the key point? He teased. Then what is? Calvin lifted his shirt, biting lightly on the fabric, his teasing smirk still in place. Check out the results. He grabbed my hand, pressing it firmly against his abs. I froze. The sensation was electric. My mind went blank as I unconsciously squeezed, feeling the heat of his muscles under my hand. Joanna, he murmured, his eyes locking onto mine. Before I could even respond, his lips were on mine. It was soft at first, like he was testing the waters. But I could feel his anxiety in the way his lips trembled against mine. What seemed like a dominating kiss quickly softened, and I felt myself melting into it. I wrapped my arms around his neck, deepening the kiss, my heart pounding in my chest. The scent of mint filled the air as I lost myself in the moment. Calvin's kiss became more urgent, his hands gripping me tighter as if he couldn't pull away. I was struggling to breathe, my body weak beneath him. When I finally pushed him away, it was only because I needed air. Are you crazy? I gasped, my heart racing as much as his. We both looked like we had just run a marathon, breathless and shaken. Calvin leaned in, his voice low and intense. Did you feel anything? My face grew hot and I stammered. What? What do you mean? He pulled me into his arms, his heartbeat thumping loudly in my ear. Did you feel your heart race? He asked, his voice rough. I could feel the rapid beat of his chest, like a drum echoing through my body. It was almost as if his heart was about to explode. It was like rapid drum beats, echoing fast and relentless. In that moment, I realized what I'd been missing with Simon. That very feeling, the quickened heartbeats. Because right now, my heart was racing just like Calvin's. Later, I managed to escape back to my room. Calvin had a nosebleed. I feared that if I stayed any longer, he might self-destruct entirely. Tossing and turning in bed, I clutched the blanket, rolling over again and again. Tonight felt like a surreal dream, my heart still out of sync, thundering wildly, unable to slow down. I tried to recall any signs of Calvin's feelings for me. Did he rip that love letter because he liked me? Or that rainy day when he threw his jacket over my head? Was it because he liked me when he gave me his meal card and told me I was too skinny? Then there's how he remembered my birthday every year, always grumbling while wrapping gifts with painstaking care. Too many awkward, twisted moments I used to think were just mutual annoyance now seemed like signs of his carefully concealed feelings. At 3 a.m., Calvin messaged me. He'd showered in cold water 3 times and read 5 ghost stories. Now he was unnervingly calm. I asked what he wanted. His reply was simple. I want to. So I told him to get lost. At 4, Calvin bombarded me with dozens of cute dog emojis, trying to win my sympathy. I replied with a photo of a satisfied dog owner. By 5 a.m., both of us, sleepless, finally agreed to starfish on empty stomachs at the beach, waiting for the sunrise. We sat side by side, watching the skies brighten slowly. The sea breeze brushed our faces, blowing away the fatigue. Suddenly, Calvin pulled my head onto his shoulder. "Lean on bro's shoulder," he said. I burst out laughing. "Calvin, don't be so cheesy." "That's how it's done in the movies," he replied, grinning. At sunrise, the heroine always leans on the hero's shoulder. Then something hit me. "Hey, last night, why didn't you have any alcohol smell?" I distinctly remembered Calvin being drunk enough to puke several times. But the kiss? It was minty. Calvin, staring at the rising sun, smiled freely. "Because I brush my teeth." "You brushed your teeth?" I asked incredulously. "Yeah, I did it secretly in the bathroom." He looked so proud. "I never fight unprepared." "You sly dog," I teased. "You planned to kiss me all along?" He grinned, leaning back. "Hell, I've been planning it for over 10 years. The dawn sky turned gold, and the sun leapt above the clouds, flooding the sea with rich, golden light. "Wow, sunrise," I cheered, excited, reaching to pat Calvin on the shoulder. When I turned, I found him staring at me, slightly dazed. "What are you looking at?" I asked, curious. "Watch the sunrise," he replied quietly. But Calvin didn't look at the sunrise. His eyes were lit by the morning light, reflecting only me. In movies, this was the moment when the leads kissed. When he leaned in, his kiss was minty fresh again. This time, the kiss was tender, lingering, and as our breaths mingled, I heard his husky voice. "Morning, girlfriend." Going from archenemies to boyfriend and girlfriend was a huge leap. But somehow, I still felt like calling him a dog, given that's what I'd been calling him for years. Calvin didn't agree, of course. He acted cute and sickeningly sweet until I finally changed his contact name. But honestly, I got used to it. "Dogs are cute. Don't you like dogs?" "No way. It's not intimate enough."
See?
"I saved you as baby. It's not like I asked you to change it." "Who said only dogs like me before?" Woof. After some effort, Calvin's contact name evolved from dog to dog baby.
He was pretty satisfied with that.
He claimed that one day, he'd get me to drop the prefix altogether. Back when we didn't get along, I always thought Calvin was more of a wild dog type. Now, though, I've realized he's more like a lap dog. Unbelievably clingy. So when school started, and he suddenly appeared at my dorm, I wasn't surprised at all. Even if it was only the second day. "What are you doing here?" I asked, looking at the guy who had graduated 2 years ago. He was wearing a white t-shirt, black sweatpants, and his hair was styled perfectly. Even his watch had a sporty band. Clearly, he'd put in the effort to look effortlessly cool. Today, his persona was that of a wholesome college guy. He leaned in, trying to get close. "I miss my girlfriend. Can't I come?" With people walking by the dorm, I quickly pushed him away. "You're just in time. Help me carry the water." Today was the student council's basketball match with the freshmen, and I was in charge of logistics. Calvin, uninvited, was now my free labor, until he ended up as our student council's substitute on the court. I noticed he was wearing basketball shoes. Was he prepared for this? And then he fist-bumped Simon? After Calvin dunked on the freshman a few times, I realized he'd come to show off. What was supposed to be a friendly game turned into something as intense as a varsity match. Calvin had hops, grabbing rebounds like a pro, and Simon's three-pointers were spot on. When the game ended, a bunch of girls rushed over to give Calvin and Simon water. Calvin pointed straight at me. "Hey, girlfriend, where's the water?" Everyone's eyes shifted to me, and I was suddenly so embarrassed. I quickly handed him 2 water bottles, but he didn't take them. Instead, he picked up the bottle I'd been drinking from and downed it. The crowd cheered again. My heart, already on edge, finally cracked. Simon walked by with a few more water bottles, pausing just for a moment. "You've got quite the skills, future brother-in-law," he said. "Future brother-in-law?" I asked, confused. I already said I'm Joanna's official boyfriend, Calvin shot back. Sure, but who knows about the future? Simon smirked, giving me a playful smile. Joanna, I'm heading out.
Bye.
I waved, quickly grabbing Calvin before he could get angry. Did you see him, babe? Calvin asked, pouting. People were still looking at us, so I hurriedly pulled him away. After we started dating, Calvin wasted no time telling Simon. Simon, ever polite, casually mentioned, Joanna isn't the only one interested in me at this school. That comment made Calvin explode right on the spot. Later, Simon even helped Calvin get a free assistant for the student council. As we walked through campus, Calvin sulked, but he held my hand tightly. I asked him, "Why'd you come peacocking at my school?" "Don't you trust me?" "It's called territorial instinct." "You wouldn't understand," he grumbled. I tried not to laugh. "Are you saying you're like a dog?" "So what if I am?" he said. "A dog's nothing to be ashamed of if I've got my honey." "If you're shameless, you're unbeatable," he added with a grin. He won, and nothing I could say would bother him now. Calvin held my hand, gently stroking my fingers. Suddenly, I felt a cool sensation. I looked down and saw a six-claw diamond ring on my ring finger. My heart skipped a beat. "What's this?" Calvin smiled confidently, hands in his pockets. "Just got a bit of cash, that's all." I pretended to take it off, but he immediately got down on one knee. "Joanna, in 5 days, it'll be your 21st birthday. It'll mark 21 years since we met, and I can't even count how many years I've liked you. From now on, it'll only be you who can push me around. I won't fight back if you hit me, or talk back if you scold me. I will only be good to you, fulfill every promise to you, and mean every word I say to you. When you're happy, I'll be happy with you. When you're not, I'll cheer you up. I'll always think Joanna is the most beautiful. It's you in my dreams, and it's you in my heart. Please, one day, become my lawful wife. I can wait for no matter how long." These were lines from my favorite movie. I'd watched it dozens of times and memorized those lines by heart. In the sunset's glow, there was my favorite guy, on one knee, confessing with lines from my favorite movie. I should have been a mess of emotions. But if it weren't for all the students gathering around, snapping photos, I pulled Calvin up, rushing through the crowd as fast as I could. "Does this mean yes?" "If not, I'll kneel again," he laughed softly, getting exactly what he wanted. "Yes, yes, yes." As we escaped, I realized Calvin was the same as always. But thankfully, there was plenty of time ahead, and we'd figure everything out slowly.